Okay, so this is going to be a video on shading. Um, so what I have here is just a plain old piece of printer paper, copier paper. I have a mechanical pencil, and I have the little blending stump tortillas that I demonstrated in terms of how to make. Then also I have this uh, ebony design pencil, which is more of a drawing pencil. So it's a wood with graphite uh, inside instead of a mechanical pencil. So I'm going to do a little demonstration of the two, I guess. So I don't need all of this piece of paper just because it's a lot of paper. So I'm just going to cut this in half. I actually have the end of my table right here. I'm just going to take half of that, kind of bring it over to the edge. Oops. And rip that like that. So quick and easy way to rip a piece of paper and cut in half. Alright, so from here we're going to do a couple things. I don't know if maybe you might have like a regular wooden pencil. It is preferable to a mechanical pencil. Just that you could cover a little bit more ground a little more quickly. Plus pencil leads can be really varied in terms of what they are, what they use. Some of them can be really thin, some can be fairly thick. Um, but this could be thick or thin, depending on how sharp it is. And as it wears down, it can kind of create more of a kind of a chisel point. So it's more versatile, really, than a mechanical pencil. You just get this one point, pretty much. And even it can get a little chiseled, and get a little bit finer point. But for what we're doing, you know, probably better to have something that's a wood pencil. But anyway, so I think so. Pretty much, probably I will stick with this, even though I think a lot of students may have this. I think for this demonstration purposes, I will stick with this. Now, one thing you may see with this, how it's sharpened. It's very organic looking. It's not like a pencil sharpener. What I used was a knife. It's kind of like a little box cutter type deal. And now I can kind of just sort of shave it and basically whittle it to the point that I want. So anyway, um, so one thing that's really nice about this particular pencil, it's called an ebony, is that it can get to, it's called jet black extra smooth. You can actually get really pretty dark with it. You can vary in terms of, sorry, that's not in focus. You can really vary the darkness of it. Now, the difference between pencils, I'll just kind of go a little in depth with this. Maybe my camera will focus. Um, the difference in leads, and it's really not even a lead, it's actually all graphite, okay? Lead isn't used, okay, in a pencil. We just typically just call it a lead, but there's no lead in a pencil. So I know some people kind of stick or prick themselves accidentally, or and they're like, oh no, I'm gonna get lead poisoning. But there's no lead in a pencil. It's actually just graphite. There's actually one other ingredient. I wish my camera would focus. Is clay. Okay, so it's lead and clay, or what's in a pencil. So the softer the um, the pencil, the less clay that's in it. And so you're going to get more graphite, less clay, and you're just going to get darker. Okay? Gosh, this camera. Let me just see if I can zoom a little closer. Maybe it'll stay focused better. So, that's a lot better. So, anyway, the more graphite that's in the pencil, the softer it is and the darker it is. So there's a letter rating on, a lot of your drawing pencils, from an H to a F to HB. I want to say F is like way out there. But anyway, so H is actually kind of hard, and I think your B gets more towards the softer, so forth, and the E or F, I think even it goes to. But so this is just sort of a general drawing pencil that can get pretty dark, and it's not as very hard. So therefore it has less clay in it. Therefore it's going to get darker. Now the only thing about having a pencil that has less clay in it is going to wear down quicker. So you might have to sharpen it more. Because you don't want this sort of round nub that you're drawing with, because then it's kind of like this blunt end that you're kind of shading with. You kind of want to keep it kind of sharp, and then, like I said, it can get to like a chisel point, and you can actually rotate it back towards the sharper side. But eventually, you'd have to get wear down so much that you need to sharpen it again. And maybe I'll illustrate that a little bit. Well, let me go into it now. All right, let me get my scrap paper. So basically, a pencil, when it's first sharpened, you get this nice sharp point. Well, over time drawing with it, it'll actually end up more like this kind of chisel kind of point, like that. Now look at the difference between what's contacting the surface of the paper. Got this nice little point versus this big kind of flat part of the pencil, right? That's going across the surface. When you have this kind of situation, this is when you end up with all this kind of kind of speckle looking kind of shading to your paper, where you got a lot of this kind of grainy quality. It's because what's happening is the paper has a tooth to it. Now this paper is printer paper. It's actually got very little tooth. It's pretty smooth. It's not like poster board. Like poster board has a glossy side, or magazines have like no tooth, okay? This is like a tooth. It's kind of like sandpaper. And I'll even go more in depth. Paper is actually like a bunch of fibers, right? And they're all kind of interwoven. And what happens is, in certain paper making processes, they get flattened out very smooth. And so sometimes they'll have like no tooth, right? They'll be very almost glossy, like magazine paper. If you ever try to put pencil on magazine paper, it just don't work. That's because the graphite that's in your pencil needs to have a tooth to it. Okay, so what that's doing is like sandpaper. It's like taking particles of the graphite off the pencil onto the paper. It's like rubbing it off. It's abrasive. So essentially, so that tooth though is kind of high and low, kind of like that. This is like really kind of exaggerated. What happens is, when you got this flat surface like that, you'll get these kind of hot, these kind of little dark kind of specks on top of the high ridges of the tooth. And then you got these little low places that are the white. So you end up with this kind of very granular. Let me see if I can use the side of the pencil to kind of show you. Well, actually this table is really rough too, but you kind of see here, you got this kind of light and dark, kind of grainy, textured quality. And now I actually kind of take away from the resolution. Imagine that being sort of like pixels, kind of uh, coming through. Now, having a sharp point, you have less contact on the paper, therefore you're putting down less graphite. But typically it comes out a lot smoother looking, just because you're getting down into the little crevices as you go, because you got this nice point. They'll kind of get in those little crevices. All right. So this really applies to anything kind of pencil-like color pencils as well. Okay. Now that's where these things can really come in, okay? Even if you got this really grainy quality like that, you can take a blending stump and then push that graphite down into those crevices, okay? And it'll smooth it out better, okay? And this can be ultra smooth, okay? Now, I'm going to tell you right now, I'm already seeing a problem with my surface of my table. This has been painted with like a roller, and therefore it's got like a tooth to it as well. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to get me a nice little folder here. I'm going to stick under this so I get a nice smooth surface so I'm not fighting the texture of the table as well. Okay, so I think I'll get a much better quality in my drawing. So, okay, so you might be in the same situation. A lot of times in a classroom, I have situations sometimes where students have like cut into the table. You can kind of see a little cut here or here. Those marks will sometimes come through in the drawing. If there's like little indentions, like a raised and low surface in the table. So you might have those situations too and have noticed that. So just like if I do this, it's not really coming through there. Let me try it with this one. Kind of see there's a little light line coming through right there. So the surface that you're drawing on can really make a difference in terms of how your drawing turns out as well. Okay. So my point here is that, talking about points, is that you then could rotate this. So then you have something kind of like this. That's a little big there. One thing about this pencil, it don't have a eraser on it. So then you're always having sort of a graphite contacting the surface. If it does get to a point like this, and it's kind of rotate it. So sometimes as I'm drawing, as I'm shading, I'll just kind of rotate it. So if I constantly sit here and shade, even if it's got a sharp point, as it goes, I'm grinding down the surface of that pencil, and you can start to see, even for a smooth paper, a copy or printer paper, starting to get this grainy quality really coming through. And if I turn this to a certain point, maybe you can see just how this is getting kind of down to a chisel point. Now, if I take and rotate this, then I get back to a really fine point. All right. So now I'm doing basically this. Okay. So with color pencils or any kind of pencil you're dealing with, sometimes as you start with a sharp point and it starts to get down to a dull point like that, kind of broad on the tip, you can just sort of take it in your hand, sort of rotate it, and then get it back to a sharp point again. So you can get this more kind of even kind of consistency. Now it is a smaller area that you're dealing with, but you can see how broad that is. It's more painterly. So it just depends on what it is you want to go for. But again, you could potentially take a blending stump and go in and try to blend this stuff. But still yet, you can still see some of my marks, my strokes coming through right there. Whereas if I kind of start out with something really nice and even like this, I'm going to get a nice, smooth, and even surface. Just because it started out nice, even, and smooth. I haven't tried this one yet. Let me see if there was to make a difference. See, that point's really still kind of too bendy. Let's see if I kind of get up closer on it. Yeah, it's working pretty good. That's okay. Still look at that point though. So I think I've discovered the better blending stomp, the paper. But you can see how much graphite that's we're picking up right there, which can be useful. Okay, because now I have graphite right there. Watch what happens. Now, my blending stomp becomes a way to apply graphite, a very pale, pale, pale gray that I picked up. So I picked up from a darker area of graphite and kind of picked it up onto the paper. Now, when you do this, now you can see there, and then I can come over here and apply it as a very pale gray. So this becomes an application tool, not just a blending tool. Whenever you're trying to blend graphite like this, sometimes it really helps to kind of go in little circular motions. By doing this, it'll kind of really get away from this back and forth kind of motion, and really kind of get things so what you're really trying to do is trying to push graphite down in those crevices. So you're trying to take it off from the top and push it down into the low spaces so that it becomes really smooth. So what I'm doing is kind of doing these kind of little circular motions, trying to get rid of that texture, get rid of those little white speckles, that kind of grainy quality, static almost. To get that all smooth looking, okay? But it really helps if you start out with something smooth, so you can see just how much smoother this one turned out than that. This is like ultra smooth. Now, not to say smooth is going to be better than rough. Rough is good in certain instances where you want this grainy quality, right? But we talk about, we're in the age of high D or high definition, right? So this would be, kind of more pixelated, low resolution versus this. This brings a lot of attention to its texture and surface, and this doesn't in terms of the pencil marks or as I'm saying, the tooth of the paper, right? So anyway, I just wanted to kind of point these things out. Typically, I see students getting a little too grainy and too textured where would be more beneficial as something smooth and soft like that. So I thought I'd kind of spend a little time discussing that, okay? All right, so let's set this out of the way and get into the thing we're really trying to achieve here, which is doing some shading, okay? So how do we shade in terms of, already got some marks in here by accident. So first of all, we need something to shade. And the first thing we're going to do is a value scale. Okay, this is just a little study on creating lights and darks. Okay, so the value scale has, first of all, let's talk about value. Okay, now from here on out, anything I do on this piece of paper is going to be your assignment. Okay, whatever I do on this piece of paper, you're going to turn in as your assignment. Okay, all right. So value equals, basically, in terms of what it means, is lights and darks. Okay, this basically can be really, white, gray, and black. Those are all the things we typically think of in terms of value. Now, it can be also applied to color. Okay, color has value in terms of how light or dark it is. Okay, so value is a really, 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 really important word. I cannot stress it. And what it is, it's one of the elements of art. Okay, there's, I think, seven elements of art: line, texture, shape, color, value, and form. so 6. Okay, um, and space. I don't think I said space. Okay, so value is a very important element, which is why it's important that we kind of start with value in terms of really discussing how important it is to bring the 3D aspect to our drawing. Okay, like I was talking about, contour drawing really has more to do with sort of the skeletal structure of the drawing, whereas value has more to do with the fleshing out of the drawing. It gives it more of that what is really form. Form is a 3D term in terms of having height, width, and depth. So we think of, sort of the cube kind of shape, and that is a form, right? You're a form, I'm a form, my hand is a form, right? Has 3D. So light and shadow is what really creates more of the form, though, which we're going to get into. Okay, but let's explore value a little bit. Okay, so what I want you to do is create this. First of all, get you a half a sheet of printer paper, and then create you a bar like this. But then we're going to divide it into 5 sections. I don't know where to stop at yet, so I'm just going to leave that open. So I'm going to create 1. These are sections, basically. 2, 3, 4, and then 5. So I went a little long there. I'm going to erase that. Okay. So I have 5 sections, and this is called a value scale. Okay. Now, value scale is typically numbered, and actually a lot of value scales typically have like 9 sections, but we've kind of just simplified this down to 5. But let's number this. Let's number is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay. So this is going to be our white. This is going to be our black. And this basically should be our mid-gray. Let's just put MG for mid-gray, okay? And we could also, let's just do this. Let's put this LG for light gray, and let's put this for DG for dark gray, okay? So we got our basically what is called a range of values. So let's go ahead and do this. We can call this our range of values. Okay, so we have a range of values of 5 values from white to black, which are basically 5. We've got white, light gray, middle gray, dark gray, and black. So if you can achieve all those grays and learn how to manipulate and use those grays and those values, you can really create depth and space within a picture, okay? If you learn how to use that. And there's one other important word that has to go along with all of this, which is tremendously important, is contrast, okay? Contrast is how like or different something is. It applies to all the other elements, not just value in terms of light and dark. So you can have low value, you can have, or low contrast or high contrast. Low contrast would be like as if these two values that are side by side, they're so like to one another, they're similar, and therefore they'd be low contrast. On the opposite end of the value scale, from white to black, that would be high contrast because you're putting a white and a black next to each other. Therefore, they're very different, and therefore you have high contrast. So it's either how like things are or how different things are. that creates contrast. Okay? And that also has a lot to do with how visible things are. Think of it a foggy day. You know, you wake up in the morning, you go outside, and it's really foggy. You can't hardly see anything. Everything's kind of got this murky gray quality to it. So there's no really dark or lights that really kind of stand out. They're all just sort of this blanket gray, right? This kind of subtle impressions of things, kind of ghostly, right? But when things get really high contrast, you know, let's say the sun comes out, the fog goes away, all of a sudden everything becomes very visible, then everything's kind of more highly contrast in terms of being able to see it. Okay, so let's create a value scale. Okay, now white, we don't have to do anything. White's already there. Okay, so let's just go with the black then. Now, this is where a mechanical pencil would have a very hard time. Okay, take a mechanical pencil and create black. You might have a hard time doing that because, for one thing, the graphite might not be that dark. Now, I will say this: no matter, regardless of what pencil I use, such as this pencil, even if it's more graphite and less clay, it's still the thing about a pencil is it's going to be kind of gray. Okay, it's not going to be a black like marker. You know, it's not going to be black like paint, because it's metallic. It's graphite. Graphite is metallic and therefore it's shiny. Therefore, it catches light and can be reflective. Therefore, it's not going to look like a black once light catches it. So I kind of have a little issue with graphite in a way, but it's very versatile. So enough with that. So we're just going to try to make a black here with graphite. Some dark as you can get. Might help to go ahead and lay down an initial pass and go back over it in another direction. Then go back in the original direction. Then maybe you can go diagonally. All we're trying to do is cover up all the grain of the paper. Just trying to fill it in with graphite. And this is where I might then turn the pencil to make sure I'm getting in there to do this. Now, I can tell already my paper, starting to get kind of indented. And it's not looking as black. So graphite is, again, something I have issues with in terms of making something look black. Just because it's not going to want to, just because it's so reflective. But that's as dark as I can get that. If I can get the lighting quite right to where you can see it, then you'll see that is pretty dark. Okay. Now I've already kind of worn down my pencil a little bit, but we'll keep going. I found the best thing to do for the middle value or the next value we do is the middle value. Not just go with the dark value, then work to the middle, then to the light. Let's kind of take the difference of these two. So we established the white, established the black. Now let's establish the middle gray, and then we can do the dark gray, and then we can do the dark gray, then we can do the light gray. Okay. So let's do what you would think is a middle gray. Something that's in between those two. Something that's 50-50, okay? So I always like to start with the initial pass whenever I do a gray of something very kind of light. That way I can establish and get rid of the grain of the paper essentially to start with. And then I can go back the other direction. And every time I kind of layer this, I'm doing this like in layers, okay? This is really important in terms of if you want to create a very neat and it's just a good approach to shading. I feel like you just sort of approach it in sort of a layered process where you just build up the values, layer upon layer, pass upon pass, and then you kind of create your values that way. Now, there's kind of, I don't know if you're familiar with window tint. Window tint You can double up window tint and create a darker tint. Just because you put down the same light tint, it gets darker. So just like this, I put down the same light value, but as I do it, as I keep going back and forth and layering kind of a light value. So now I'm marking very light with this. And so I need to demonstrate that real quick. So, all right, so do this. Make as light a mark as you can make. Okay, kind of like that. Maybe I can give it even lighter now I've done that one. I'll see if I can just barely touch the paper. See how light that was? You can still see it, but I'll just barely touch the paper. I'll try to touch it even lighter than my first attempt. Now let me see if I can make something just a little bit darker than that. Now let's see if I can make something a little bit darker than that. Now let's see if I can make something a little bit darker than that. Darker than that. And then darkest. I got kind of wide there. So you can see how hard you bear down the pencil will determine how dark it is. Okay. So that's kind of as I'm going here. You know, I'm applying things fairly light, maybe kind of even as light as that, and then building up my darkness. Now, by doing that, I'm creating more control. I'm able to kind of fill in the gaps in between the marks as I go, so that then my marks don't show if I wanted a nice, even, consistent look. Okay? So I'm feeling pretty good about that as far as a mid-gray. Now I want to create something that's in between those two. And I want to be able to notice it in terms of its difference. And this is going to be challenging. Hopefully I didn't get too dark on the mid-gray. Now as I do this, here's one thing I'm trying to avoid. Okay? That's bringing too much attention to lines and marks. Okay? I'm trying to create more of a consistent, even field of gray. Field, like a layer, like a film of gray. That just isn't going to work. Okay, now if you like texture and pattern and wanted that someplace, maybe that would work. But we're just trying to create an area of sort of value. Okay, so each pass I'm trying to fill in my gaps. I'm trying not to go too fast here. I did here a little bit, and I did create some gaps. So I'm trying to fill in those gaps. It just makes it neater, kind of makes it more high definition. Okay, so I'm just kind of still matched that. So now I got to go a shade darker. Again, trying to control, not creating gaps. Filling in any gaps as I go back. And just try to create a shade. So a term I haven't used yet is a shade. Shade typically has to do with value. So I'm just creating like a lighter dark. That's a term used for color or tone. Sometimes you hear it called. Tone also has to do with lights and darks and values. Okay, so I'm starting to get a little bit close to my dark if I keep going there. Okay, my mid-gray is not looking so dark anymore. I might need to kind of put another little pass over my mid-gray here. Let's kind of darken it up a little more. Okay, so that feels pretty good. It feels like a good progressive step from one value to the next. It's not like a big leap between values, and I can still see this edge. This edge tells me that this is darker and this is lighter, this is darker and this is lighter, therefore I can see that edge. There's contrast, okay? All right, so now I haven't been using this, and there's no need to yet, okay? I mean, if you wanted to smooth this out, you could, but I will say this. If you did do this, your value is going to get darker. Because what it's going to do, it's going to push graphite down in these crevices of the white and make it look darker, okay? Because what it's doing is actually filling that graphite down into the tooth or the low spots of the paper, right? So therefore it's making it look darker. So if I do it this, it too would look kind of darker. Just because, like I said, you're filling in all the white of the paper. Some graphite, so therefore it looks a little darker. It doesn't look quite as dark as that. And I don't know if this would really make a difference here. It might would a little bit. That does seem to be making a little difference. So that did appear to get darker. Look how metallic and shiny that is. Anyway, so this is very hard to photograph, by the way. So when you're photographing work that's made of pencil, it's almost like you got to photograph it at an angle. Therefore, so you don't get that shine in it. So you got to really be careful how you photograph graphite in terms of drawings. Okay, so we got a light gray to do here. So let's do that real quick. So now I'm just barely going to touch the paper. Put down a very fine layer of gray. And just 2 light passes. Now it looks like that's all I'm going to do. And that's it. If I go any darker than that, I think it's going to get too dark. And I may have gone a little too dark on my mid-gray. Now, the only problem is if I tried to erase that, there's an issue with that. It could smudge and smear, but it might pick it up. And I could maybe get it back a little lighter. But an eraser also can have a tendency to smear, because you can see how the graphite builds up on that, right? See if I can clean that off the surface. Okay, so you can clean an eraser, by the way, right? So I could go in here, got a little too dark. I can go in and see if I can pick some of that up, right? If I got too dark. Okay, so now we look at that. That looks a lot better. I feel like a good transition between these grays and how that's working. Okay. All right, so we're almost there. We're going to create now a 3D object. Okay, we're going to apply what we've learned with the values in terms of light and dark, and let's create a 3D object. Okay. All right, um, so we're going to create a sphere, okay? Um, and this is where you might want to get a circular object to trace. And I just so happen to have this little paint canister that I could use as circle, okay? So see if you can find something circular maybe and put down here. That I felt like that would be too big, so I'm going to use the bottom part. I'm going to place that down. Now when I do this, I'm going to trace it very lightly, okay? Not very dark at all. So I'm going to just barely, now notice how I'm holding the pencil. If I hold the pencil at the very end of the pencil like this, and then kind of do that, it's almost like I'm just using gravity, right? And you can hardly just, it's not even hardly really making a mark. But if I grit on the pencil a little tighter, then I can make a very light mark, right? It's still visible, but it's not dark. But if I grasp my pencil like this, the tendency is, of course, to make a dark mark. So teaching students sometimes just how to make a light mark is sometimes hard. Maybe just grab it with like the tips of your finger and then just kind of apply it that way. If you have a difficult time making a light line, okay, that's something to maybe practice, okay? So let's pull this back over. Okay, so I'm making my tracing of my very light line, right? So I'm grabbing it just basically with the tips of my finger. And tracing the bottom of my cup. Let's see how I did. Not too bad. Got a little messy there, so let's fix that. Now the reason I don't want the edge of this to be too noticeable is we don't want a line there when we're done. Okay, that's a line, that's a contour. We want this to be done light shadow. Whenever you see something like that, it looks flat. Okay, we're trying to make something that looks 3D. Okay, so that would be if we did it really dark, such as this. Good luck trying to get rid of that, okay, in terms of when you're done with your shading. I have a feeling that when I'm done shading, I'll be able to make this disappear, the lines around this versus that. That'll still be noticeable and make it look flat, okay? All right, so just like with a ball, you know, a ball's edges kind of go around and go back in space, right? So we want the edges to go back. We don't want the edges to come forward, you know, such as what this does, okay? And that's what's happening when we over outline things really dark, brings too much to those edges, and therefore it flattens out, okay? We really see our world through light and shadow in terms of value. We don't see it through edges in terms of contour lines. I don't have a contour line around me. You don't have a contour line around you. We just have edges, okay? And edges are apparent purely because of differences of color and value and things like that. Not because we have a contour around things, okay? All right, so that would be more like a coloring book, all right? Or it looks kind of flat, or a cartoon. We want to make things that look kind of 3D and realistic in terms of what we're trying to do, okay? All right, so we want to make this into a sphere. And lo and behold, look what I got. I got a sphere. Although it's not really showing you in terms of light and shadow the way I would like for it to. But anyway, so I just happen to have something sitting around like that, so I thought I'd just show you real quick. So we need to make this look like it's sitting on a surface. So what I'm going to do is I want to draw like an edge back here. So I'm just going to draw a straight line, even though I don't have a ruler, which is fine. So it's kind of like a horizon, right? Or maybe the edge of a table. And so therefore now it looks like it's sitting on the surface, all right? But we want to give this light and shadow, okay? And that's why we're doing all of this, is to give it this 3D illusion of form and light and shadow, okay? So let's do this. I'm going to draw like a little light bulb. And pretend it's putting off light. Now what this is, this is called our light source. Okay? A light source is from the direction in which our light is coming from. Okay? So it's coming from this side. Let's say it's coming more kind of down to this angle though. And so what's going to happen is a couple of things. Okay? And I'm going to show you this little diagram. Alright. Get this thing to focus. Come on, focus. Alright. Alright. So we have our light source basically coming from this direction, right? And we have our sphere, okay? And we have our horizon. Then we're going to create this sort of this cast shadow, okay? This is our highlight, okay? This is our light. This is our shadow. And basically our core shadow. I think usually this is called the core shadow, but I'm going to say this is core shadow. And then there's one other part. And you don't have to do this part. Okay, you don't have to do this whole diagram. This is called our reflected light. Okay. Now what's going to happen is I'm going to keep this as light as possible. This is where most of the light is reflecting off the object. And this is going to be our light area. Okay. And then it's going to start to get a little darker, like crescent moon shape. And then it's going to get a little darker to our core shadow. And then we're going to get a little lighter right here on the edge, because what happens is light comes past this, hits this surface back here, then reflects light back into the back side of the shadow, therefore creating this sort of lit edge. Now, a couple of things really important with this cast shadow. It's always really, really, really dark right up underneath. It's actually the darkest right up underneath. Now, the edge is really important. This is going to be a hard edge, meaning it's almost like cut paper. It's very visible. Out here, it's going to get very soft to lost. Because as a cast shadow goes out from the object, it gets lighter, okay? So you got this area here casting a shadow all the way back down here. Therefore, it's going to get a little bit faded, okay? This edge is going from here to here, therefore, it's going to have a hard edge, okay? So the further away an object is from what it's casting a shadow on, that cast shadow is going to be softer edge. So what you're going to see is less of an edge being very apparent there. Okay, and we're going to do this all through value. Okay, so let's get started on that. All right, so what I like to do first is create this kind of ellipse kind of shape for our cast shadow. I feel pretty good about that. No, maybe not. little too big right there. Okay, so now I feel better about that, but I got a little too dark. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to hit that with an eraser. May fade out a little bit because I kept drawing over it. I was trying to refine the shape and it got a little too dark. So I have sort of a ghostly appearance of it, right? I don't want that edge to show when I'm done, right? All right, so now we're ready to start shading, okay? So here's how I like to approach this. I kind of like to just kind of establish a very pale gray. Remember, I'm just trying to fill in the grain of the paper, the tooth of the paper. Now, the main thing I'm trying to do right now is leave the highlight. Leave the part that's the highlight and make sure that it's the lightest part. And I'm trying to barely touch the paper. But that's this initial light gray. Now I'm trying to get as light as possible to go around the edge of this white area. You probably can even hardly see any gray there. Now, we'll try filling any gaps. I'm out of crew because I did that pretty quick. There are gaps. Okay. Now there's one thing we haven't practiced yet, and that is a gradient. We need to interpret this into kind of a gradient, okay? So let's do this. This is a gradient, okay? This is a light to gradually dark, gradual gradient, okay? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start out as light as I can. Probably shouldn't be able to go lighter than that. But as I go, I'm going to start to press down a little bit harder on the pencil. And then press down a little harder. Press down a little harder. And gradually just keep applying more and more pressure. So I create a gradient, okay? Okay, it's a gradient. Now sometimes it's called a blend. Sometimes it's called many things, like rendering, okay? And really what that indicates is a subtle, slow change in value. Things that are rounded will have that. This is kind of a shift in value. It's like you see this edge here because there's a sudden change in value. There's no sudden change in value in this. It's so subtle and so gradual that you just don't see it. Now that was done very quickly with one layer. As you know, I don't like to do things in one layer. So what I like to do sometimes is go back a second pass to kind of smooth things out. Build up my values as I go. Smooth it out a little bit more because you get a smoother look. You don't want the grain of the paper. right? And that looks a little better. So what I like to do is kind of start out with a very gradual and then kind of build up my layers and build it up, even though these areas will be darker, okay? So what I do now is I'll kind of kick back out to maybe this area and put down another layer to kind of build this up out here, okay? So what I'll do is kind of start to put down another light layer, maintaining this area, keeping it the way it is. And really I'm just trying to fill in any gaps, any voids, so it doesn't look like my pencil marks are so apparent, which would take away from the illusion of what I'm doing. So then it would just look like marks on a surface. I'm trying to create a sphere, an illusion. Now let me show you one thing. If I have a light value, and then it's supposed to be gradual, but I end up with sort of a darker value next to it, where I've created this sort of edge like that, what you can do to eliminate that edge, okay, is to create a sort of value that's in between the two right next to it, like on this side of the light area. So now all of a sudden notice the edge just vanished, okay? The edge vanished because I created this sort of value that was in between these two right there at the edge that conjoined the two. Now it's just a blend, okay? So just know that's a trick, okay? All right, so now I'm kind of just keep working my way back into the darker areas, okay? I don't have to keep, I'm done here. So all I have to do is keep working my way back into these dark areas. So now, I'll come back here. I'm just really trying to keep this consistent and make it look very gradual and gradient. Now I think I'm done here. Now I'm really going to focus on this kind of darker crescent kind of area. The core shadow. Got my light, I've got my highlight, my light, my shadow. Now I'm working on my core shadow. Now, as I'm doing this, I need to kind of retain this little crescent light area, which is my reflected light. Okay, so I'm feeling pretty good about this. Although now, it's just not quite dark enough here. I'm looking at the screen there, I'm seeing a little bit of work maybe right here. Okay, I'm getting that 3D look, it's getting there. Okay, really important you maintain that light area. I did go back in this area just very lightly just to kind of touch things up. Now let's see if I can really pump up the value just right here, this core shadow area, which really give it that contrast it needs. To really make it 3D looking. Now, if you approach it the way I did, you're really almost not going to need one of those. If I go in with this, that's really going to make things maybe look smoother, but it's also, like I said, it's going to kind of make things look darker. I kind of like the way things look right now. So I personally, in my past, I've never really used one of these that much. I've always approached my drawings kind of in the manner which that you just saw. You know, I just approach it in this very layered, kind of gradual approach, and not really use one of these blending stumps. Um, but that's up to you in terms of creating that kind of very blended, smooth kind of look. That might be what you want to use. Okay, so I'm feeling pretty good about that. All right, now there's some really important things going on. This edge is really important there yet, and we really don't have the outside, so we really need to work on that. And I think the highlight's a little low right now. So let's see if I can push it up a little higher here. I think that's working a little better there. Push it up a little higher. So now let's work on this cast shadow. Now what I'm going to do here is kind of start again, just lay out sort of an initial kind of light value, just to kind of get things kind of established and started. I feel like this needs to be kind of reshaped a little bit. Now I got my initial value down. Now I'm pretty much kind of done out here. All I'm going to kind of do is just darken up kind of more towards the center part of this. And maybe get a little more dark out towards the edges as I get closer to the sphere. And now get even darker towards the center and closer to the sphere. And now just really get dark. I mean, just saturate it with some graphite right up under it. That's really bring out how light that is, but we're going to fix that. Not completely as dark out here as it is up under there. Now notice the gradients we've created. You know, I talked about gradient. That's a gradient. Look at that gradient, right? Look at that gradient. You know, gradients happen everywhere in nature. If you want to make something look 3D, you've got to learn how to blend and create a gradient. If you want to ever draw a portrait, a nose, a mouth, lips, even teeth, you've got to learn how to create a gradient. This looks like a gradient, but that's not really a gradient. Everything's kind of like one value, one value, one value, kind of all separated. If it was more gradual, it is kind of a gradual values, but the edges showing up doesn't make it very gradual. All right, so that dark right there is what really makes that pop, okay? So this is a little too light right here. Let's kind of fix that. Let's get a little darker up under there. And then I'm going to try to bring this edge out just a little bit. Maybe put a really light value right there. It's not as quite as light as it was. Maybe I'll put another little darker value up against it to make it stand out. I can't help it. Well, just keep working on stuff sometimes. I can't help it. All right. So I got my reflected light. Okay. Now there's a couple other things we can do this to complete it. And part of that has to do with the background. The problem is our highlight isn't going to quite look very light until we get rid of all this light around it. Okay. All this white that's around it is competing with the white that's there. This is supposed to be the lightest thing in our picture. It's not because of all this. So let's do this. I'm going to create kind of a very pale light gray. And I'm not going to bother with putting a lot of time in on it. I'm just trying to get rid of the white of the paper. Through here. Actually, let's make it a little lighter over here and a little darker back here. No, actually, we'll keep it light back here. Or maybe a little darker. Well, you make that cast shadow kind of blend in. Soften up that edge a little bit. Just by putting a value next to it that's similar to it. And that edge will come out more because this is kind of lighter over here. Okay? So now, let's do the reversal. Let's kind of go light over here, back here. Then as we come up towards the front here, let's maybe go a little darker. Try to separate these two by being a little darker here. A little lighter back here. Just trying to fill in my gaps now back here. Oops. Make that edge kind of stand out a little bit. Make this edge stand out a little bit back here like this. And we're kind of constantly practicing a gradient. What gradients can do. Okay? So kind of got this gradient going across here in the background, gradient going across here in the foreground, or the ground. A little too light right there. Now, these are things that you can practice, okay, and constantly practice and practice and practice and practice. And what you'll do is you'll just get better. I cannot tell you how many of these I've done before. I mean, hundreds probably, maybe in the thousands by now. But I've made a lot of these, and over time, you know, it's just practice in terms of getting better and better at trying to do the you know, control of value. And then you can even then try to master it in other mediums like paint or, you know, color pencil and color, and try to do things that to where, you know, you can just get kind of better at other mediums, just because the same principle applies in terms of how light and shadow works on the objects we see. Okay, there we go. All right. I know that was a long, drawn out explanation, but there we go. Felt like it needed this. It's almost like creating like the accents, okay, to really make it kind of pop. Give it that extra bit of contrast. Okay? All right. That's it. We're done.